Jonathan Reed sat in his car outside the Grill Max Burgers location, gripping the steering wheel with a quiet intensity. The neon sign flickered in and out, a faint buzz of electricity humming through the night. He had built this company from nothing, envisioned it as a place where workers were valued and customers left satisfied. Yet, over the years, his empire had grown beyond his reach. Numbers replaced names, reports replaced relationships, and for the first time in decades, he felt like a stranger in his own kingdom. Tonight, that would change. He adjusted the glasses on his nose, checking his reflection in the rear-view mirror. His salt and pepper beard had been thickened with dye, his tailored suits exchanged for a second-hand flannel and a pair of worn-out jeans. His usual air of authority had been carefully stripped away. He wasn't Jonathan Reed, CEO of GrillMax, anymore. Tonight, he was Jack Richards, an out-of-work line cook looking for a fresh start. The hiring manager barely glanced at him. "You worked in fast food before?" the man asked, flipping through the fake resume Jonathan had prepared. "Yeah," Jonathan said, forcing himself to sound less assured than usual. "A little bit here and there." That was enough. The manager, a stocky man named Derek, scrawled a signature at the bottom of the form and shoved a red uniform into Jonathan's hands. "You start now. Get changed." Jonathan barely had time to process the sudden shift before he was ushered into the chaos of the kitchen. The air was thick with the scent of frying oil and charred meat, the sharp hiss of the grill punctuated by the rhythmic beeping of timers. Workers darted past him, their movements fast and mechanical, their eyes dull with exhaustion. A young woman with dark circles under her eyes nudged him toward the break room. "Better move quick." "Derek doesn't like waiting," she muttered before disappearing back into the fray. Jonathan changed hurriedly, taking a moment to absorb the peeling paint, the dented lockers, and the pile of unwashed aprons shoved into the corner. There was no warmth here, no sense of pride, just survival. When he stepped back into the kitchen, Derek was already barking orders. "Maya, register. Chris, grill. And you new guy, just try not to screw up." Jonathan fell into place at the prep station, watching the others with quiet curiosity. Maya, the girl from earlier, moved like she had been born behind the counter, punching in orders with mechanical precision. Chris, a lanky teenager with a perpetual scowl, flipped patties without looking up. A third worker, a boy no older than 16, nervously wiped down trays, sneaking glances at Derek every few seconds. It didn't take long for Jonathan to see the cracks. The fryers overflowed with grease that should have been changed hours ago. The storage fridge sat slightly ajar, its motor whining from overwork. The entire operation ran on the frayed edges of efficiency, held together only by the exhausted hands of the employees. Luis, the nervous teenager, dropped a tray of fries. The crash sent a ripple through the kitchen, and for a moment, everything stopped. Derek turned slowly, his expression darkening. "You idiot," he snapped, striding over. "That's coming out of your paycheck." Luis scrambled to pick up the fallen fries, his hands shaking. I didn't mean to." "I don't care." Derek loomed over him, voice low and venomous. "You screw up, you pay for it." Jonathan felt a sharp heat rise in his chest. He had expected inefficiencies, maybe some minor mismanagement. But this was cruelty. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain in character. He was here to observe, not to intervene. Not yet. As the shift wore on, he listened. Between orders and rushed conversations, he pieced together the truth. Workers were scheduled for shifts that exceeded legal limits. Paychecks mysteriously shrank without explanation. Complaints about safety hazards were ignored. "You should have seen what happened last week," Maya muttered while ringing up a customer. "Renee, the one who worked here for years, asked for maternity leave. Derek fired her the next day." Jonathan's hands stilled on the counter. "Fired her?" "Yeah. Said she wasn't pulling her weight." Maya's voice was thick with anger, but there was something else beneath it, resignation. As if she had long accepted that fairness had no place here. The injustice of it sat like a stone in Jonathan's gut. This was his company. His name was on every paycheck, every storefront. How had this happened? How had he let it? By the time the dinner rush hit, exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders, but it was nothing compared to the employees who had been running on empty long before his arrival. Derek hovered near the back, eyes scanning the floor, watching for the slightest mistake. Luis moved a second too slow. Derek pounced. "I told you to be faster," he snapped. "Customers don't like waiting." Luis flinched. "I'm trying." "Try harder," Derek growled. "Or don't bother showing up tomorrow." Jonathan felt his fingers curl into fists. The line between observer and CEO was blurring. He couldn't just stand here. He couldn't just watch. He was about to step forward when Maya's voice cut through the tension. "He's doing his best," she said sharply, placing herself between Luis and Derek. "Maybe if we weren't understaffed, it wouldn't be a problem." Derek's face twisted in anger. "You got something to say, Maya?" She lifted her chin, defiant. "Yeah, I do." Jonathan held his breath. The kitchen had gone silent. Even the customers at the counter had sensed the shift. But Maya hesitated. Fear flickered across her face, the realization of what speaking out could cost her. In that split second, Derek saw his opening. "You don't like the way I run things," he said, voice deceptively calm. "Maybe you should start looking for another job." Maya's bravado crumbled. Her shoulders sagged, and she bit her lip, swallowing whatever protest had been forming. She turned back to the register, the fight draining from her. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. He had seen enough. As the shift dragged on, the weight of what he had uncovered pressed against him. He had built GrillMax to be a place of opportunity, not exploitation. Yet here, at one of his own locations, the reality was something far different. He had come here expecting to see flaws. He had not expected to see rot. When the clock finally hit closing time, he stepped outside into the cool night air, inhaling deeply. The street was empty, the city's noise reduced to a distant hum. Behind him, the restaurant door swung open. Luis stepped out, stuffing his hands into his pockets. He hesitated before glancing at Jonathan. "Hey, Jack." Jonathan turned. "Yeah." Luis hesitated, then exhaled. "Don't get too comfortable here," he murmured. "Derek's already watching you." The warning sent a chill through Jonathan's spine. He wasn't just another employee in Derek's eyes. He was a threat. And if tonight had proven anything, it was that Derek wasn't afraid to eliminate threats. The dinner rush hit like a tidal wave. Orders flooded the screens, fryer baskets hissed in protest, and the scent of grease clung to the air like an invisible fog. Jonathan, Jack, he reminded himself, moved as quickly as his unpracticed hands allowed. He flipped burger patties under the sharp glare of heat lamps, his fingers clumsy on the spatula. The rhythm of the kitchen was relentless, and he was drowning. "Keep up, old man," Chris muttered as he slid past with a tray of sizzling fries. He was young, maybe 20, with tired eyes that made him seem older. Jonathan didn't respond. He focused on his station, struggling to keep pace with the others. It had been decades since he worked a grill, and it showed. The movements of the younger employees were fluid, second nature, but there was no camaraderie. Only exhaustion, only necessity. Derek loomed near the registers, barking orders, but offering no help. He had the look of a man who enjoyed his authority too much. When Maya accidentally dropped a bun onto the floor, he was on her in an instant. "Are you blind?" he snapped. "That's product waste. I'm docking your pay for that." Maya flinched, her hands tightening into fists. "It was an accident." Derek scoffed. "Then maybe you should be more careful. Or maybe you don't need this job at all." The words hung in the air like an open wound. Maya swallowed hard, her expression carefully blank as she bent to clean up the fallen bun. Jonathan watched, his grip on the spatula turning white-knuckled. Later, in the cramped break room, he found her sitting at a sticky table, staring at her untouched meal. "You okay?" he asked, keeping his voice light. She let out a dry laugh. "Sure. Why wouldn't I be?" Jonathan hesitated. He had seen people break under pressure before, corporate executives, seasoned board members, but there was something different about this. This wasn't a battle of numbers. This was survival. "This place is a nightmare," Maya said, shaking her head. I'm stuck here because I have to pay rent. But Derek? He enjoys it. I swear, he finds new ways to make people miserable. Jonathan frowned. Has anyone reported him? She snorted. To who? The district manager? You think they care? Derek makes the money. That's all that matters. Luis, the youngest worker on shift, slid into the seat beside her. If you complain, he cuts your hours, he muttered. Happened to me last month. I went from 35 hours to 15 overnight. Jonathan felt his stomach tighten. Half the time he makes us clock out but keep working, Luis continued. Says it's part of being a team player. Jonathan forced himself to keep his expression neutral. His mind, however, was reeling. GrillMax had policies in place to prevent this kind of abuse, but policies meant nothing if no one enforced them. And clearly no one was. The next shift was worse. The fryers were overworked, their oil thick and bubbling, long overdue for a change. The kitchen's ventilation system rattled like it was barely holding together. A puddle of grease had collected near the back, unmarked and ignored. Jonathan nearly slipped on it twice. At one point, a cook named Jamal burned his arm reaching for a batch of fries. He hissed in pain, pulling back to examine the reddening skin. Run it under cold water, Jonathan said automatically. Jamal gave him a look of disbelief. We don't get breaks. Jonathan glanced toward the front, where Derek stood talking to his assistant manager. He wasn't paying attention. Jonathan grabbed Jamal by the sleeve and pulled him toward the sink. 2 minutes, he said. You won't be useful with a second-degree burn. Jamal hesitated before shoving his arm under the running water. He let out a breath of relief. Derek's gonna kill me. Let me worry about Derek. The words left Jonathan's mouth before he could stop them. He was getting too involved. He knew it, but every instinct screamed at him to intervene. He had built this company with the belief that his workers were the backbone of the business. And here they were, broken and mistreated, fighting just to make it through a shift. He couldn't ignore it. That night, as he sat in his car, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through the latest corporate reports. Profits were up. Efficiency had increased. Everything looked perfect on paper. But those numbers didn't show Maya's exhaustion. They didn't show Luis losing his hours or Jamal's burned arm, or the way Derek wielded power like a weapon. Jonathan clenched his jaw. This wasn't just bad management. This was systematic abuse. And he wasn't sure he could stay silent much longer. Jonathan was losing control. He could feel it, his mask slipping, his restraint thinning. Every hour spent in that kitchen, every interaction with Derek, every exhausted sigh from the overworked staff chipped away at his ability to remain a passive observer. The first few days, he had told himself to watch, to listen, to gather information. But that resolve was cracking. He had already interfered too many times, stepped in when he shouldn't have. And the worst part? It didn't seem to matter. Derek ruled the store with an iron fist, and everyone knew it. During the late-night cleanup, Maya nearly collapsed while scrubbing the grill. Jonathan had watched her struggle for minutes before finally stepping in, taking the scrubber from her hands. She had stared at him, startled, before nodding her thanks and sinking onto a stool. The moment lasted only seconds, but Derek had seen it. You looking for a handout, old man? He sneered, stepping into the kitchen. Because this isn't charity work. Jonathan straightened, setting the scrubber down. Just lending a hand. Derek's lip curled. Don't. She's not paid to sit around. Maya started to stand, but Jonathan gently pressed a hand to her shoulder. She hesitated, her eyes darting between them, then slowly sat back down. Derek took a step closer. The air between them turned heavy. You got a problem with how I run my store, Jack? Jonathan met his stare evenly, every ounce of his CEO instinct telling him to put this man in his place. But he couldn't, not yet. Just trying to do my job, he said finally. Derek snorted. Then do it. And stay out of things that don't concern you. Jonathan didn't reply. But as Derek walked away, he knew he had just crossed an invisible line. The next day, the retaliation began. Jonathan's assignments doubled. Derek had him running between stations with no clear purpose, switching between tasks, so often it was impossible to keep up. when he stepped in to help a struggling employee. Derek called him out in front of the team, mocking his pace. "What, you need a walker, old man," Derek said, laughing. A few of the newer employees chuckled nervously. Jonathan said nothing, but Maya and Luis exchanged a glance. They saw what was happening. During the midday rush, a new shipment arrived, massive crates of frozen patties, stacked haphazardly by the back door. Normally, unloading was a two-person job. Derek assigned it to Jonathan alone. It was a test. Jonathan knew at the moment he stepped outside and saw the size of the load. His muscles ached from the week of relentless labor, but he gritted his teeth and started anyway. He wouldn't give Derek the satisfaction of seeing him struggle. Box after box, he worked in silence. The sun bore down on him, sweat gathering at his brow. He wasn't 20 anymore, and his body reminded him of that with every lift. But he had built an empire with these hands, and he'd be damned if he let one pathetic manager break him. After what felt like an eternity, he was down to the last few crates when a voice interrupted him. "Hey, what the hell is he doing this alone?" Jonathan turned to see Chris standing at the door, arms crossed. Luis appeared behind him, then Maya. Derek stepped outside, chewing on a toothpick. "Jack's proving a point," he said, smirking. Chris shook his head and stepped forward, grabbing one of the heavier boxes. "Yeah? Well, I guess we're proving one too." Maya took another. Luis grabbed two. Jonathan looked at them, something warm and unexpected blooming in his chest. Derek's smirk vanished. "I didn't tell you idiots to help." Chris rolled his eyes. "Too bad." The unloading finished in minutes. Derek watched, his jaw tight, eyes dark with irritation. He didn't say anything, but Jonathan could see the calculation in his gaze. This wasn't over. Later, in the break room, Maya dropped onto the couch with a sigh. "That felt good," she admitted, grinning. Luis laughed. Derek looked like he swallowed a lemon. Jonathan exhaled, rubbing his hands together. "He's going to retaliate." Chris shrugged. "Let him. What's he going to do? Fire all of us?" But Jonathan wasn't so sure. Derek didn't strike him as the kind of man who let things go. The evening shift was a slow burn of tension. Derek lurked in the background, watching Jonathan with unreadable eyes. The air in the restaurant felt different, charged, uneasy. At closing, as Jonathan wiped down the counters, Derek stepped beside him. "You think you're clever?" he said, voice low. Jonathan didn't pause his cleaning. "I think I'm just doing my job." Derek let out a quiet chuckle. "You talk different. You act different. I don't know what your deal is, but I know bullshit when I see it." Jonathan stilled. Derek leaned in, his voice a whisper. "You're hiding something." Jonathan turned to face him fully. "And what exactly do you think I'm hiding?" Derek smirked, stepping back. "I don't know yet, but I'll find out." He left Jonathan standing there, the hum of the kitchen equipment filling the silence. For the first time since this started, Jonathan felt something close to fear. The next morning, Jonathan arrived at the restaurant to find a new name on the schedule. His. And next to it, in bold red marker, were the words "on call only." He felt the message in his bones before he even read it. Derek had made his move. The store buzzed with quiet tension as the employees noticed. Luis shot him a sympathetic glance. Maya's hands curled into fists. Even Chris, normally indifferent, muttered a curse under his breath. Derek leaned against the counter, watching. Jonathan set his bag down slowly. "This your way of getting rid of me?" Derek grinned, chewing lazily on a toothpick. "Nah, just making sure we prioritize real team players. You understand." The meaning was clear. On-call status meant no guaranteed shifts, no hours, no paycheck. It was a slow, silent firing, the kind that left employees stranded without a reason to fight back. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt truly, blindingly furious. But he forced himself to breathe. He had spent his career making decisions with a level head. Now wasn't the time to break that discipline. He turned away, picking up his bag. Before he could leave, Maya stepped forward. "This is bullshit." Derek arched a brow. "You want to join him?" Chris wiped his hands on his apron, stepping beside her. Yeah, maybe I do. Luis moved next. Then Jamal. One by one, the employees abandoned their stations. The kitchen stilled. The air hummed with something electric, something powerful. Derek's smirk wavered. Get back to work. No one moved. Jonathan looked at the faces around him, their quiet defiance, their exhaustion sharpening into resolve. This was bigger than him now. He turned back to Derek. You don't have control anymore. Derek scoffed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. He opened his mouth to snap back, but a new voice cut through the room. What the hell is going on here? A woman in a crisp suit strode through the doors, heels clicking against the tile. Catherine Liu, the regional director. One of the few people in corporate who still had real authority. Jonathan exhaled. Perfect timing. Derek straightened. All arrogance suddenly morphing into fake concern. Just some scheduling confusion. Nothing to worry about. Catherine's gaze swept the room. The employees standing together. The uneaten food growing cold. The tension so thick it nearly choked the air. She turned to Jonathan. And you are? For the first time since he'd walked into this restaurant, Jonathan stood tall. He reached up, pulled off the cheap glasses, and ran a hand through his graying hair. The disguise had never been much, but shedding it felt like breathing again. Jonathan Reed. He let the name settle, watching as recognition dawned in Catherine's eyes. Then, slowly, he turned back to Derek. And you're done. Derek's face drained of color. Wait, what? Jonathan stepped forward, voice calm but firm. I built this company on the idea that employees matter. That if we take care of our people, they'll take care of the customers. But you turned this place into a prison. Derek sputtered. Sir, Jonathan didn't let him finish. Underpaid workers. Intimidation tactics. Wage theft. Cutting hours as punishment. He shook his head. You've cost this company more than you realize. Catherine pulled out her phone. I'll have HR here within the hour. Derek turned frantically to the employees, as if expecting anyone, to defend him. But they only stared back in silence. He took a step back, his confidence crumbling. This isn't fair. Jonathan tilted his head. Neither was what you did to them. A beat of silence. Then Derek scoffed, turned on his heel, and stormed out. The second the doors swung shut, the tension broke. A slow wave of relief rippled through the room. Maya let out a breath. Holy shit. Chris grinned. We actually did it. Jonathan smiled, but there was still work to do. He turned to Catherine. We need to fix this. Raises, better conditions, real changes. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We'll make it right. As she stepped away to make calls, Jonathan looked at the team. His team. They had risked everything for each other, for what was right. And he knew, without a doubt, that Grill Max would never be the same again. And that was a damn good thing.